Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast, live from Radio Row at Circa Sportsbook. We're at kickoff weekend for Circa Survivor, Circa Millions. Our presence here at Radio Row for our fourth year, Nick. This is crazy. I remember doing it above the Sportsbook from the Burger Place first year. Now we have a pretty active Radio Row. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, this is by far the biggest Radio Row I think that we've had since Circa started doing this. And yeah, we've come a long way, Jeff, from our perch above the Sportsbook when we were broadcasting during some very, very meaningless preseason games. But awesome to be here. We'll talk a lot about the contest that Circa is offering this season, the overlay, the guarantees continue to grow. We got the Grandissimo contest, Jeff, which I think you're planning to enter, right? Which is, it's only $100,000 buy-in.
Just 3 entries, that's all. But we're excited. We already did a video with Derek Stevens, the owner of Circa. And he's going around doing the rounds. We're talking about the contest. It's fantastic. We love doing it. It's going to be great. Let's talk about some of the quick news of the day. We'll start off in Tampa Bay. Chris Godwin is not going to be on the PUP list for the start of the season. Neither is Tristan Wirfs.
This is good news overall, but when you read into the details on Godwin specifically, who, of course, we're much more concerned about for fantasy purposes, the Buccaneers, or at least the reporting around this is, yes, he's dodging the PUP list, but they still don't expect him to be out there for week 1. We're still, I think, looking at probably an early October debut for Chris Godwin. The Buccaneers continue to tell us he's hitting all the checkpoints. They're not disappointed at all, in the progress that he's made. But at the same time, he's yet to do anything full speed. He's yet to do any sort of cutting on that ankle. So I am now preparing as though Chris Godwin likely won't be out there until week 4, week 5 at the earliest. To me, that seems realistic. Jalen McMillan, of course, likely to miss the first half of the season, if not more. It sounds like he's going to end up on IR. And, this is really, maybe it boosts Mike Evans a little bit, Jeff, but more than anything, this just fuels the Emeka Egbuka fire.
Absolutely. I got my first share of him, by the way, yesterday in the RotoWire Stake League.
All right.
$200 auction budget there. We start 3 receivers and a flex. It is a half-point PPR, not a full point, unfortunately, but got him for $14. Filled my flex spot. He's my 4th receiver. I got to say, I probably could have used a running back in the flex, but I always like using a receiver in the flex. I'm just happy I checked that box. I got another Travion Henderson share, too. So kind of built some steam on that one there. And I felt like I jumped in at the right time on both of those players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people that, are in the best ball streets are probably telling you, well, I was drafting, Emeka Egbuka months ago, and I got the real value here. But I don't think those prices are going to change. If anything, they might continue to rise, if you're still doing drafts, between now and week 1. And that's just the price you're going to have to pay when both of these guys have been probably the 2 biggest helium candidates in the NFL so far. But yeah, there's going to be massive opportunity for Egbuka to establish himself early on. I am still a Chris Godwin sympathizer, Jeff. I'm hoping he's going to be on the board when my next pick comes up, hopefully today, in the RotoWire Invitational, which is crawling along. We are on pace to set the record, I think, for the slowest draft of all time. But
where are you?
I think we're in like round 8.
Oh my gosh!
We're probably averaging about 5 hours per pick. This is a league where you got some people who are international, so we're working on different time zones. It is what it is, but we are putting the slow draft. I'm still willing to. 16, by the way. I'm still willing to stash Chris Godwin. Assuming you're good at the wide receiver position, which where he's going now, it's pretty tough to get to that pick 100, 110, even later. I think in some drafts, and we'll see if this news really does anything. I don't think it will. I think it just kind of hammered home the general expectation that he's going to miss multiple games to begin the year. But I don't view this as a wash type of season for Chris Godwin. Like I've seen some of that on Twitter of like, well, this will be kind of a rehab year. Egbuka's going to take over. They paid Chris Godwin this offseason. I think Baker Mayfield still trusts Chris Godwin maybe above anybody else in that wide receiver room. At least that's how they operated over the first half last season. So I remain interested, but obviously you got to make sure that you're stocked up at wide receiver and you're not depending on Chris Godwin really until week 6, week 7 when he's fully up to speed.
Agreed. I got him in round 9 of the Invitational. That's my first time landing Chris Godwin in a while. Since we got a little definition there. Keep in mind, there's now a little bit more urgency with the Bucs because of the Jalen McMillan injury out until at least week 9 they're talking about. So from that standpoint alone, right then and there, you're talking about maybe a delayed return, delayed return for McMillan. Egbuka, of course, is going to get a lot more steam because of that too. I'm doing a little look now as we talk about where Egbuka's gone ever since he kind of shined and started training camp here just in the last few weeks. And it's because we have a question on the winner. Where are you willing to go with him? I think 7 feels about right in a 12-team league. What say you?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, he's in that zone right now. If you're looking at updated ADP among wide receivers at the NFFC, we always like to use the NFFC, get some really sharp data coming out of there. He's in the same zone as Pearsall, another big-time riser, Jerry Jeudy, Roma Dunze, Ibuka, and you got Travis Hunter going at about that same spot. And that's a run of wide receivers with some kind of secondary running backs mixed in. You'll see Pacheco, you'll see Tony Pollard, you'll see DeAndre Swift in that zone. So to me, there are actually some pretty appealing running backs there. You're kind of beyond the dead zone, and you're getting into guys who are viewed as those lower-end running back ones for their own team. And I do kind of like, those running back options. I'm at the point where I'm certainly taking Ibuka over Travis Hunter. Now, that is a matter of personal preference. If our friend Alan Soslowski was here, he would tell me I'm wrong and that I should be taking Travis Hunter in the first round. I am pumping the brakes on Travis Hunter from a fantasy perspective this season. But, Emeka Ibuka versus Jerry Jeudy, I think is really interesting. I still think I would take a Dunze over Ibuka. That's a really, really tough call. But everything we're hearing out of Chicago is that, they really want to ramp up the workload for a Dunze this season. I'm inclined to believe that offense is going to be better. But the Jeudy one is interesting because, you have what might be the worst team in the NFL record-wise at the end of the year versus a really, really good Tampa Bay offense, one that, yes, you lose Liam Cohen, but I don't expect to see a massive step back. They hired internally to replace him as the offensive coordinator. So are you willing to bet on the number one for a bad team or the early season number 2 / could be a 2/3 for much of the season in Tampa Bay?
It's a good question. And you can also probably put Jacoby Myers in that range as well, right? At the bottom end of that range. But I think it's an interesting group there. I mean, you mentioned it there. It's Ibuka. Ricky Pearsall falls in that range. Another trendy guy right now. Travis Hunter, trendy. Roma Dunze, another guy that's on the rise in a lot of places there. Trying to make that decision. I mean, we tend to group players and say, oh, you can take one from that area. But which one you choose actually does matter. That's the thing that's always, we talk about tiers all the time. But really, the choices within the tiers matter in getting that right. And I'm not going to take Hunter in that tier. I'm with you on that one.
How about Pearsall versus Ibuka? Is that a decision for you? Because I'm taking Pearsall right now.
I am taking Pearsall too. And we saw the Niners make a trade yesterday. They went out and reached for the Sky Moore. And I don't know. That more looks to me like a volume play. Demarcus Robinson got the 3-game suspension to start the year. We know that Brandon Aiyuk's not coming back until at least week 6 against said Bucks that we were talking about earlier there. They've had other injuries too. Jacob Cowings is hurt right now. Their depth has just been evaporated. They need bodies. And that's one of the reasons why they took a chance on Sky Moore. It cost them very little too.
Yeah, I mean, Sky Moore's become a joke, of course. So, a team trading for him is not going to generate a ton of positive buzz. But, as far as landing spots for a guy to try to get his career off the ground, to get a fresh start, it's like San Francisco is close to a best case scenario. I think getting in that system should have some opportunity, you would think, early in the season. Because, like you said, no Aiyuk, no Demarcus Robinson. It's not only Jacob Cowing, some of their other depth, Russell Gage, Jordan Watkins, some of these guys that are borderline roster type of players, even they're banged up. And look, Sky Moore has done very little to justify another team taking a chance on him. I think it speaks to the desperation in some ways for the 49ers, just knowing that they need, an NFL body in that receiver room. Obviously, you're not drafting Sky Moore. I think expectations should remain fairly low, but it's not like he ended up with the New Orleans Saints or the Cleveland Browns, right? It's like this is, in theory, a decent landing spot for him to try to get the narrative reversed on his career. By the way, we also had a very interesting trade involving the New Orleans Saints, paying a 4th-round price for Devon Bailey. Look, I really like Devon Bailey. I think it was clear that, the Broncos are willing to move forward with Mims and Franklin and Pat Bryant as their kind of big 3 beyond Cortland Sutton in that wide receiver room. But a 4th-rounder. And a 4th-rounder specifically, Jeff, that will very, very likely be at the top of the 4th round. That was a bit of a head-scratcher.
Total head-scratcher. The Rams always have this reputation, F them picks, right? It's the Saints. They are the OG of the F them picks. They are the team that really does that all the time. And I don't understand the Saints. It's the whole cue that Michael Scott explained it to me, the Saints as if I were 5. Because I don't understand what they're doing at any given moment. To me, it's one of those moments. I don't get it there. And it does clarify the Denver room. I think that's like the biggest fantasy implication from that. It's not what happens with Vele. It's what happens with Denver. That this helps a little bit more on Marvin Mims. It really helps Troy Franklin and Pat Bryant, I feel like.
For sure. And on the Vele thing, I get bringing in the talent because, again, he showed some flashes in Denver. I think we all kind of like the player, but to pay that kind of price for a guy who, by the way, turns 28 in December, he's only going into his second NFL season. He came in as a much older prospect. Like I don't see the long-term upside here, but like you said, this is how the Saints have operated for a very long time. And even when it's clear that they're going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL, they're still trying to maximize this thing, whatever that means. And by the way, it's still no decision between Spencer Rattler, Tyler Shuck. I don't really think Jake Gaynor.
All coming down to the wire. We're waiting with bated breath on that one.
Does it matter to you? Does it matter to you whatsoever if it's Shuck or Rattler to start the season? Because I think we're seeing both of these guys at some point.
I think you're right. I think you might see Herner at some point in time too. I mean, I think you'll see them all. But it does matter, but I can't define how it does. I do have Ratliff in one stupid super deep super flex league where he's my third or fourth quarterback, and that might matter for a bye week. I don't know how it's going to play. Like if I have Chris Olave, I don't know who I want to win the job. That's my problem. My problem is, probably Rattler. I probably prefer Rattler, but it's not really like a lock it in. I really know that. Just one of the things about that the two trades yesterday, it shows that people are hurting for wide receiver depth. And Minnesota Vikings, there was a tweet about that, talking about all the injuries they're having in camp with their wide receiver group. Obviously Jefferson missed a bunch of time. Jordan Addison is both hurt right now and going to be suspended for 3 games. Jalen Naylor is hurt right now. Ty Felton has missed some reps in practice. They're going to be looking to trade for a wide receiver too. So maybe New Orleans thought they were getting ahead of it there. Maybe they thought that their scouts really loved Vele, and maybe they thought it was worth it, and that he could be a rotational guy at some point in time.
Yeah, Vele as a fit in Minnesota to me makes a lot more sense, right? Because if you're New Orleans, you're not just playing for this season, next season. You're playing for 2027 and beyond. And, it's like, are you going to pay Devon Vele on the second contract when he's 30 years old at that point? Like, to me, that doesn't make sense. If you're Minnesota and you kind of view it as a 1 or 2 year rental, that to me would make sense because Minnesota, in theory, is at least somewhat going for it, right? You have the roster outside of the quarterback to push for something. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we've heard about Ty Felton, about Lucky Jackson, those guys kind of competing for that 4th wide receiver spot when everybody's healthy. It sounds like both of those guys are maybe more longer term type of prospects. But Jalen Naylor, this is a big one. This is week to week, right? I think there's a real chance that he could end up missing week 1. And he was actually somebody I had taken a shot on late in some drafts, thinking, okay, maybe you get a month out of him, until Jordan Addison is back and fully up to speed. The other guy they've lost too is Rondale Moore.
Who, for the season already. Yeah.
One of my all-time favorite college players, Jeff.
No.
His career might be over, man. This is multiple serious injuries, multiple years in a row now. And, who knows to what degree they were really depending on Rondale Moore, but that just, adds to the desperation.
Absolutely. This podcast is brought to you literally by the good folks at Circa Sportsbook. Circa Million and Circa Survivor are back with a massive $21 million in guaranteed prizes. Circa Million, pick 5 games against the spread each week. 18 weeks of action with 126 ways to win. $1 million for the winner and $6 million guaranteed. Circa Survivor, 1 pick a week, no point spread. Last the longest to win it all. At least $15 million guaranteed. Enter in Nevada, play from anywhere. $21 million guaranteed. Visit circasportsbook.com for details. There are hosts here this week. We are super excited to be here. I'm going to be joining in on Circa Survivor. I know, Nick, you're doing Circa Millions again. Are you partnering with John McKechnie again on this one? Or are you doing this solo?
I'm going solo on this one. Now, that does not mean I will not be consulting with John McKechnie. We'll be doing a weekly NFL betting podcast video. You can find it in your podcast feed. You can find it on our YouTube channel. That'll be starting up, of course, in advance of week 1. So there'll be plenty of consulting, but I have the hammer, Jeff, is really what it comes down to. I have some other consigliaries who I chat with every week, in Milwaukee. We got some football guys there who I like to garner some input, but at the end of the day, I'm the one that's filling out the Google form. I'm the one that's submitting the pick. So the results are on me. That could be good or bad. Most likely bad.
Right. Absolutely there. Apologize for the echoes here. We're dealing with some acoustic issues there. We'll try to do our best to try to get rid of that. But let's talk a little bit about Survivor. Let's just talk about the concept of Survivor. Tips on how to do well. Tips on methods here. I think one thing we have to point out, Nick, this contest is unique compared to other Survivor contests because we have a separate week just for Thanksgiving, just for Christmas. You have those 20 weeks instead of 18, and you have to kind of work backwards. It's really one of the important things you got to realize there is look at that schedule, find your guys that you're going to look at there, and then make sure that you hold off on those two teams for the early in the season.
Yeah, it's one of the things that makes this Survivor contest so unique, so difficult. There's a reason that they produced a 7-part documentary about this, which you can check out over at vsin.com. That was incredible to watch, and made me envious that I did not enter Circa Survivor last year. Although maybe that was not the year to dive in, Jeff, because it felt like 90% of the entries. Yeah, I mean, week 1 was brutal, week 2 was brutal, week 3 was brutal, and then we went on a long stretch where things did even out. But yeah, right. That's the differentiator in this contest is, Thanksgiving week, Christmas week, you need to make sure you're saving teams. And to me, that's so much easier said than done, right? You can look at the schedule and say, all right, well, yeah, I'll just circle this team. Context changes so quickly in the NFL. And, we talk a lot, when it comes to Survivor about, trying to map things out. I'm a proponent of doing that early in the season, but it's so difficult to assess where a team is going to be in, say, week 12, right? If you're saying, all right, I want to save the Niners for week 12. If you did that last year, that didn't work out for you because Brandon Allen was starting games and half the team was injured. There's just I think on the surface, Survivor seems like, all right, we're not dealing with point spreads. I just got to pick one game. There's going to be a big spread every single week. It's so much harder than it looks on the surface.
Absolutely. And let's take a look at that Thanksgiving week schedule real quick here. So you know which teams you're saving. Green Bay at Detroit. Doesn't seem like a Survivor type of game there. Kansas City at Dallas. That if it were Dallas at Kansas City, maybe you'd be thinking about saving the Chiefs there. Cincinnati at Baltimore. Ugh. I don't want any part of that. And then Friday, you get the Friday game, Chicago at Philly. Okay, here you go. Everyone's going to save Philly, right? Is that going to be the conclusion? What if Jalen Hurts gets hurt? What if the changes on the offensive line, losing Becton, maybe Dickerson? We'll see what happens with his injury status there. What if that is the daisy chain of events? What if Ben Johnson turns?
Yeah. What if the Bears are good?
The Bears into the monster of the Midway again? All of a sudden, the facts on the ground have changed.
Right. And, I think that is the one that I would circle, that Black Friday game, which is part of the Thanksgiving slate. But at the same time, that means you're not using the Eagles for either of those Giants games that come a few weeks before Thanksgiving. I think both of those would be really appealing. Honestly, early in the season, there's not really a great spot, I think, to use Philly. Maybe that week 1 game against Dallas, but to me, there are better options in week 1. After that, they're at KC. They get the Rams in week 3, then at Tampa Bay, home against the Broncos. It is a really tough early season slate for the Eagles. I think those 2 Giants games would be the ideal spot. And then, Kansas City at Dallas, I think that would be the other one that jumps out. I don't want to touch Packers Lions. I don't want to touch Bengals Ravens, 2 divisional games.
Right.
But again, with Kansas City, you do. And with Kansas City, there are some appealing spots, I think, leading up to Thanksgiving. They have a game in week 3 at the Giants. That one you feel great about. They're at Jacksonville in week 5. They're home for the Raiders in week 7. So again, it's very easy to look at the schedule and say, all right, well, this is the spot I'm going to burn the Kansas City Chiefs. But this is a uniquely difficult Thanksgiving week, I think, relative to years past.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think you look at, and we talked about the Thanksgiving wrinkles. Well, 3 of those teams are also playing on Christmas Day. Dallas is at Washington. Detroit is at Minnesota. KC is hosting Denver. Good luck, by the way, because none of those are easy decisions too. I mean, we're talking 3 different divisional games on Christmas Day. But I think the answer, though, is kind of, hey, good luck. Congratulations. You made it to Christmas Day. Save one of those teams for sure. But don't sweat the small stuff in that case.
Well, let's talk about something that's a little bit easier, at least in theory. And, hopefully nobody clips this when we go out in week 1 in Survivor. But taking a look at
week 1, except for last year where I totally went out in week 1. But yes,
taking a look at the week 1 slate. What would be? I think there are probably 2 or 3 spots that would really jump out to you. Denver at home for Tennessee. I think that's going to be really popular. 7.5 is the number there. Jags are 3-point favorites at home against Carolina. I'm going to tell you right now, I would not trust the Jaguars in that spot whatsoever. I think they should win that game, but who knows? It is the Jacksonville Jaguars. You got the Patriots as 2.5-point favorites at home against the Raiders. That's one I think I would stay away from. You got the Variance Bowl, Dolphins Colts. Colts currently 1.5-point home favorites. I think, Jeff, the one that's going to be most popular is that Cardinals Saints game. I think everybody's going to be on Arizona. That number's up to 6 now at DraftKings.
Yeah, I can see it there. This could be a giant exercise of fade the Saints, but how many times have we seen Kyler Murray lay an egg on the road? I mean, I'm leaning Denver here. Denver against Cam Ward in Tennessee. That's the way I'm going there. I'd rather take the home team if possible.
Yeah.
Non-divisional game, rookie making his first start on the road in a tough environment. That seems to me like a good formula for me. But what if Cam Ward is him? That's the thing. But that Denver defense, man, I want that defense against a rookie quarterback making his debut. That's the way I'm probably going to lean right now.
I think that's fair. I think if your goal is just, I'm not really forecasting anything. I know how many people went out in week 1 last year, how much carnage there was. Just get me to week 2. I think that's your safest play.
Yeah.
The argument for Cardinals Saints, assuming you're picking the Cardinals here, by the way, is like, is there another spot where you'd feel better about using the Cardinals? Maybe it's week 2, home against the Panthers. Maybe it's, week 4, week 5, it is, home against the Tennessee Titans. I think that has to be part of the equation too, where it's not just, all right, what's the biggest spread on the board? What team am I picking? It's, trying to strategically use some of these teams that are not obvious, right? Like there are going to be obvious spots throughout the season to use teams like the Bills and the Chiefs and the Ravens and the Lions, et cetera. But, you got to dip into that middle to lower tier if you're planning on making it through 18 weeks. And I think that's a big part of the equation when it comes to some of those unknown teams like Arizona.
Yeah, you really can't just play, fade the Saints every single week. First of all, you got the divisional game, so you only get to do that once. But, I'm just pulling up the futures odds here at Circa, and one of the things they have is the odds on anybody going 0-17, just anyone, not alone picking that team, but just anyone going 0-17. It's plus 875 on the yes, minus 1400 on the no. It's a pretty strong favorite to have everybody win at least one game.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens. We look at these teams. Oh, they're so bad. They're still pros. They're still playing on Sunday, for a reason. And the Saints, they think that, the way they're acting as if they're still trying to win. They're not trying to rebuild. They're trading away draft picks for crying out loud.
Right.
Mickey Loomis, do your thing. I mean, just be you. But I've got Arizona schedule up right now, and yeah, you're right. I'm going to say this really quietly, but they got a home game against Jacksonville too. That might be an option later on in the season, but probably not. Probably you can. Yeah, I would say this is probably their best opponent. It's just on the road. That's the one thing, you always worry about them.
Yeah.
Last year, remember though, a lot of people were picking Buffalo home against Arizona, and we're thinking that they're going to be really bad, and they almost won that game.
Right.
That was had a lead at halftime. Bills had to rally in the second half sort of game. So, yeah, again, week 1's been really tough.
Let me ask you this, Jeff, and I know this is a very sensitive topic for you. Is there a world in which you would just take the Bengals on the road in Cleveland? No chance? Not even with starters playing?
I won't personally. I saw that defense on Monday night, first of all. Secondly, I Zach Taylor 1-11 in weeks 1 and week 2. I mean, I can't get around that. And I know they've been playing their starters in the preseason. They won't this weekend, probably. I hope not, thank God. But that defense is horrible. Trey Hendrickson's out, still not playing. I mean, they did nothing to improve the defense. They did other than draft picks, but they're signing TJ Slayton. I mean, my goodness, he's not even a starter. They did nothing to improve the pass rush. They did very little to improve the defensive line. The offensive line's got a big hole at right guard right now. One of the guys they thought had a chance of winning it, Cordell Volson, was probably having the best camp of all the candidates. He's out for the season with a shoulder injury. Please, Myles Garrett's going to line up over that right guard, whoever it is. It's going to create havoc. I probably won't pick the Bengals against the spread that in week 1 either. Just like you have talked about before, I'm a self-hating fan. It is one of those things I worry about a little bit there. So I probably won't go that route.
Yeah, I tweeted about this the other day, Jeff, somewhat in jest, but really it was only like 30% joking. Like, is this the first ever must-win week 1 game in NFL history? Like, if the Bengals lose this game, how hot is the seat for Zach Taylor?
It's hot. It's really hot. It makes week 2 win or get fired game.
Yes,
against your Jaguars, and unless
I know, I mean, the Big Cat Bowl,
and your Jaguars are viewing that game as a must-win too. By the way, which because they've got their schedule picks up in a hurry. Again, schedule analysis is fraught with peril because teams change. One injury can change everything. Teams aren't who we thought they were. Some teams are better. Some teams are worse.
That's true, but I'm more willing to read into the schedule early in the season when it's less likely that injuries are piling up, right? I think if you're circling a game in week 15 and saying, oh, they're absolutely going to win that, like who knows what's going to be happening at that point. It can happen, of course, where you have early season injuries, but I think that you could script out those first 4 or 5 games maybe a little bit more than you could later in the season. And you're totally right about Jacksonville. And this is one of many reasons why I still like Houston at plus money to win the AFC South. I mean, Houston has a tough schedule as well, but Jacksonville has been prone to getting off to these slow starts, even when they've had relatively successful seasons by Jag standards. Like they've always had to battle back, it feels like, in the second half of the year. And that's been one of many problems for this team, is that they are not overly resilient. When they get punched in the mouth, especially these last couple of seasons, it just feels like, all right, we're 1-4. We have no way to climb out of this. Got to win that Panthers game in week 1, because otherwise that does become somewhat of a must win against the Bengals, because you're facing the Texans in week 3. You're at the 49ers in week 4. You get the Chiefs in week 5. Then it's Seattle, and then it's the Rams. Things don't really soften up until midseason. And even then, the 2 Titans games are stacked late in the year. You get the Jets late in the year. You get the Colts twice in the last 6 games. Like it's a gauntlet. Those first 11, 12 weeks for Jacksonville are really tough.
100% agree. This podcast is also brought to you by Renegade Fantasy. Fantasy football players, aren't you done watching your season crumble because of injuries and underperforming players? Join the RotoWire League today on the Renegade Fantasy app, the only app that lets you substitute players in real time. Go to rotowire.renegadefantasy.com and hit join today. With Renegade, you're not just a GM, you're the coach. No more losing Sundays, no more lost points. You call the shots, you make the moves, you win the league. Step out of the luxury box and onto the field. This is fantasy football without limits. This is Renegade Fantasy. Join the RotoWire League today and win. Visit rotowire.renegadefantasy.com and join the league today. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. Let's talk about some other of the week 1 matchups here. See if we can find a few nuggets. Nick, what game do you have your eye on?
One that I've had my eye on from a betting perspective is Steelers-Jets. And the total is down to 38.5. It is pretty easily our lowest total on the board right now. Ravens-Bills, by the way, is up to 51.5. This is the only game, Jets-Steelers, that's in the 30s. I think the next lowest is 42.5. We got a couple of those. Cardinals-Saints, 42.5. Raiders-Patriots, 42.5. Titans-Broncos is 41.5. I like the under in that one, by the way. I think that Denver defense is going to be incredible. But I lean under, honestly, on 38.5. That's how I would play this. I don't love the number. It's sitting at 3 right now as far as the spread goes. I think this Jets team is really going to struggle throwing the ball. We've seen that in the preseason. It got to the point, Jeff, where they held a players-only practice the other day, something I did not know.
It can't be good. That just can't be good. It's one thing to have a meeting. To have a practice that's players only. We're talking about practice.
This might be the first time that's happened in NFL history. I know somebody was saying, "Oh, this is a Parcells tactic." Apparently back in like the 80s or 90s, the coaches walked out of practice because they were so frustrated and just said, it's on the players. So that's where we're at right now with the Jets offense, where they are practicing without coaches. I do think the Jets defense will be better than it was last year. I think I expected that to be a much better unit than it was in 2024. And I don't think we can look at the Steelers offense and say it's explosive right now. We're not necessarily hearing great things about Caleb Johnson. Doesn't feel like he's grabbing that job by the horns. Aaron Rodgers obviously at a different point in his career. You have one receiver who you can depend on in DK Metcalf, who's a very good player, but he's not in that top shelf when it comes to that position. So I think this is going to be a grind. I mean, this could be a 16-10 type of game in week 1.
Yeah, I remember when the schedule release happened, I did give out the under in this game, just on reputation alone. The fact that Rodgers hadn't signed at the time. So that maybe it was another thing. It could have been Mason Rudolph. They might. Yeah. Here's a little controversial take. The Steelers might be better with Mason Rudolph at quarterback than Rodgers. Come on. They might be.
Maybe. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Rodgers doesn't want to get hit. He goes with the quick throws. He doesn't make certain throws anymore. I could be wrong about this, but I'm sure that's not true. But
it's Mason Rudolph.
That's true. That's true. But I will say this. Rudolph has looked better in camp than Rodgers so far. And that might be just a learning curve. That might be him getting up to speed. My Pittsburgh guys, they're apoplectic right now. They are not happy about Rodgers in here.
Well, I think part of it is just the Aaron Rodgers experience, right? Where his reputation has taken such a hit over the last few years that I think most people are predisposed to dislike Aaron Rodgers, to expect the worst from Aaron Rodgers. I think look, Rodgers is clearly not the guy that he was even at the end of that Green Bay tenure, but I still think he was somewhat underrated as far as pure quarterback performance last year versus performance of the team for the New York Jets. And look, when your other option is Mason Rudolph, I'm going to endorse that signing. And look, I've lived my whole life in the state of Wisconsin. I've watched, basically every Packers game that Aaron Rodgers played. So maybe I view this a little bit differently than people who, did not watch his career like I did in Green Bay. But again, it'd be one thing if the Steelers had like a developmental type of quarterback or even like a relatively safe, other option. But the Steelers are that team that they want to win at least 9 games every year. They want to find their way into a wild card spot. I think Aaron Rodgers gives you a significantly better chance to do that than Mason Rudolph.
True or false? The Steelers get their first losing record under Mike Tomlin this year.
False. I think they keep it going. I don't know how they're going to do it, but smart money over the last 15 years says they're going to find a way to get to 9-8.
I mean, the win total's firmly set at 8.5. So
as it should be.
Yeah, over at DraftKings juice slightly to the over at -115. That defense is fearsome, but they have some bad juju even there with the Cam Hayward situation.
Right.
Chris Boswell, a kicker, is doing a hold in. By the way, that we spent a lot of time on Trey Hendrickson, on Micah Parsons, of course, on Terry McLaurin. What about Chris Boswell?
Yeah, we don't do enough kicker talk on this
never.
show, and maybe we'll do our kicker and defense special maybe at some point. Which I think both of those are actually a little bit underrated. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole here, but in the NFFC last year, for instance, like playing the weekly streaming defensively, in that type of format. I mean, you could easily put up a 20+ point week if you pick the right defense. Chris Boswell himself was super valuable in fantasy last year, so we'll dive into that more in another episode, but. You look at the Steelers' schedule, obviously you got that Jets game in week 1. I think you feel, even though you're going on the road, you feel like you probably should win that one. Home for the Steelers, home for the Seahawks in week 2, the DK Metcalf revenge game. At the Patriots in week 3, home for the Vikings in week 4, home for the Browns in week 5. Like there's a pretty clear path to me to going 3-2 in those first 5 games. You could really sell yourself on 4-1. I don't think they necessarily get there. But I think this is a pretty doable schedule. You get the Colts midseason. That's a very winnable game. It does stiffen up toward the end, outside of getting the Dolphins at home. And who knows what this Dolphins team is going to look like. There are some difficult games over that second half, right? You get the Bills out of division. You got to go to Baltimore in December. You have to go to Detroit. That's going to be really tough. But I'm not betting against Mike Tomlin, man. I think they get to 9 wins. All
right. We're in Las Vegas. I want to talk a little Raiders-Pats in week 1. Line on this one is New England -3, totals 42.5. Nick, I am simultaneously saying that the Pats might be getting overhyped after winning, quote unquote, the offseason, and still thinking I want to pound New England -3 on this game here. I think the Raiders defense is going to be Bengals level bad. I think this is they got Max Crosby, but they lost a lot of talent in free agency. I think that secondary is awful. I think it's going to be one that gets torched. I think Drake May in year 2 is going to be a different brand of player. I think this basically this -3 is basically you're the home team, you're the favorite sort of line. I think the Pats are a better team than the Raiders. I really like the Pats in this one here.
Yeah, I mean, you can get 2.5 right now at DraftKings as well. Which if you really like that, I would lock that in now because I could certainly see that moving to 3. I think this is actually a really fascinating week 1 matchup, right? You have 2 teams that I think have higher expectations than they have in recent years, specifically New England, right? I think that's kind of the obvious team that could make the leap from one of the worst in the league to maybe not one of the best, but 8-9 wins. My expectations for the Raiders are certainly lower, but at the same time, it feels like you kind of have a actual professional head coach in the building.
That's true.
There's plenty of hype around Ashton Genty, Brock Bowers year 2. I mean, there are things to believe in when it comes to the Raiders. And you also have the best quarterback that you've had in, I don't even know, how far do you have to go back before you get somebody who you would say is definitively better than Geno Smith? So I think that could be a closely contested game. That is not one that I would necessarily be looking to touch just because I think there's enough variance with the Patriots. I think this team will be significantly better, but I want to see it first. I'm not one of these people that is just penciling in New England for 9 or 10 wins because they made a bunch of additions in free agency and brought in Travion Henderson and brought in Mike Vrabel. Like that all matters certainly, but at the same time, I need to see it before I believe it. Maybe one way to attack this, Jeff, if you're so suspect of the Raiders defense is like, would you look into the Patriots team total 21, 22.5?
Yeah, sure. I would definitely look at it that way. If you're if you don't want to fade Geno Smith, you don't want to fade Ashton Genty and Brock Bowers. I get it. I think that's not a bad way to go and bad way to live life here. Do you have any other takes? And any other, like, do you have a week 1 lock already? One that besides that Steelers Jets under, do you have anything else that you think you'll play for Circa Millions?
Yeah, so I mean, millions you can't do totals, unfortunately, or that would be one of them. But
right.
the one that I put in the VSiN betting guide, and we'll see where the number ultimately locks by the time we get to week 1. But it's up to 6 now. I got it, I believe, at 4.5. We've seen some pretty major movement here, but again, it's Arizona over New Orleans, and okay. I'm not even in on this Cardinals team, which just says a lot about how out I am on the New Orleans Saints. Like, I think this is going to be a true disaster. And look, maybe I'll be wrong. The Saints scored like 96 points in the first 2 games last year. I just don't see that being the case. I actually think this Arizona defense might be good. I think this is kind of a tough matchup for New Orleans off the bat, going up against that defense. Now, do we trust the Cardinals offense to pull their weight here when we're talking about a spread that could be touching 6.5 by the time we get to week 1? I don't know. Other than that, I don't know if there's really an obvious, must-play type of spot. Like, you can't feel great about either side of Ravens, Bills, Texans, Rams. That's a really tough one. Lions, Packers, 49ers, Seahawks. If you're not a Sam Darnold supporter, I think that could be a spot. If you're somebody who's really back in on this Niners team, we'll see what their injury situation looks like ahead of week 1. But Niners minus 2.5, that's something I would look at. That Denver, Tennessee game, I think certainly could be lopsided, but 7.5 is a tough number for me right now.
Absolutely there. It is a shame you can't lock it in now on that number there.
I would love that. A little pre-lock.
Right. But that is one of the things about Circa Millions. You have to wait till the lines drop in the middle of the week. Then you make your pick. And that's one of the complicated factors for that. That's going to wrap up our live from Circa Sports Radio Row for our podcast today. We got plenty more content coming here over the next couple of days. Really excited about doing Radio Row here. I'm Jeff. He's Nick. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back at you again soon.